Hi, this is Michael Jones, Chairman and CEO of Caravel Concepts. Welcome to Market Insights, our periodic commentary on markets and economic events. Let's get started. Last week, I did a video trying to explain the controversies about how the Fed looks at inflation through their cost push model that says that when wages go up, that's bad for inflation, so we need wages to stop going up. And our beliefs about inflation is sort of a monetary phenomenon. When the Fed prints too much money, we get inflation, and that unemployment's kind of a secondary effect. And the basic feedback we got is, look, thank goodness Sarah asked questions about oil and food at the end of it, because ultimately that's where I'm living and breathing, is the price I got to pay at the pump and the costs that I see at the grocery store. And the Fed, whether they're thinking cost push or monetarist, they ignore food and energy, my most important cost items. And so I want to know what's going to be happening to the things that affect my life most directly. What's going to be happening to energy prices? What's going to be happening to food prices? And how will Fed policy affect them? First thing, let's be very clear and fair to the Federal Reserve. It's not that they don't understand that food and energy are directly consequential to every American household. That's one of the largest cost items, and probably our biggest perception of inflation happens when we drive past a gas station and go, oh my gosh, what has happened to gas prices? Or in recent weeks, we drive past and say, oh, thank goodness, they're down into the $3.50 range. You know, that's a big flashing light that we all kind of use to decide whether inflation's going with us or it's going against us. And so the Fed understands that, and they also understand it's a big part of a lot of people's budgets. And for middle class and lower middle class and the folks that are aspiring to rise up into the middle class, those gas prices are devastating. And even worse when you go into the grocery store and food is much more expensive than it was last month, the year before, and so forth. The Fed understands all that. So why is it that they're not spending a lot of time and energy focusing on energy and food? Because they don't feel like they have a lot of control over those inflationary pressures that directly affect those two areas. If you think about energy, for example, just in the last few months, some of the biggest impacts on energy prices have had to do with an invasion by Russia into Ukraine. The negotiations, whether they're going well or poorly with Iran, because if Iran can get a new treaty on their nuclear program, then that's millions of barrels of oil that could come onto the market. So when they're being reasonable, people say, hey, we might get more oil. And when they're being unreasonable, which is most of the time, this is Iran after all, and people get all depressed, we're not going to get oil. The Fed can't control any of that. And if you look at food prices, right now, the Yangtze River, the heart of Chinese civilization for 5,000 years, has run dry in many sections along its length. And so has the Danube, the Rhine, the Colorado River here in the United States. These are things that we have not seen in recorded human history. And it's not just that, oh gosh, we can't move food up and down the river like we normally do. It's also, the Yangtze is absolutely critical for irrigating rice farms. If there's got no water, neither does the rice. And same thing across the European breadbasket. Same thing across Kansas and India. They need rain for wheat, corn, rice, and so forth. And when they don't get it, that puts upward pressure on prices, and the Fed has no power to make it rain. So, and you're probably saying, okay, great. You've now given me a great excuse for the Fed not being able to help me with what I most care about. So what should I be thinking about food and energy prices? And what are the prospects for getting some relief at the pump and at the grocery store? And my first statement will have to be something of a cop-out, because there are so many, out of the blue kind of things that happen, like an invasion of Ukraine, or the amount of rain that they get in China. This is fraught with peril. But if you believe, as I do, that the most important fuel for the inflationary fire is printed money, the Federal Reserve has cut off its printing presses, and money supply growth has dropped from 25% 24 months ago to about 4% right now. So there's not nearly as much fuel on the forest floor that could support a fire, that could support continued increases in commodity prices like wheat and oil and so forth. And so, and indeed, if you look back since money supply growth started plummeting, oil prices are down 30-35%. Same with wheat, despite these droughts. And same with corn, despite all the droughts and despite all the disappointments in production, cutting off that money supply seems to be having an impact on basic commodity prices. So that's a really good tailwind that can help relieve some of the pressure. There are some other tailwinds coming up. So for example, right now, oil is continuing to fall. It's down probably another 3% today. And you can say, well, why would that be? We've had Saudi Arabia announced a production cut this week. Iran made another series of apparently unreasonable demands, and so it's less likely that their oil is going to come into play. And so why are oil prices falling? Well, if you're a Democrat, you're saying because of Joe Biden. This is all to his credit. And of course, Republicans who 6 months ago were saying it's all Joe Biden's fault that oil prices are going up, they're now saying, hey, he has nothing to do with oil prices going down. Well, now they're right. He has absolutely nothing to do with this. It had nothing to do with them going up or down. Presidents can affect oil prices 3 or 4 years from now by the policies they implement. They can have almost nothing with what's happening at the pump right now. So what's happening at the pump right now is that Americans, and even more so Europeans and people all across Asia and Latin America, they have reacted to the shock and horror at the pump by stopping driving as much as they can. And that dramatic decrease in demand is the reason why Saudi Arabia cut production this week. They see this happening. They're saying people aren't driving as much, they're not getting as much oil. And more importantly, they're seeing demand decline in the summer, that's when people are taking vacations. That's when people are flying. That's when they're driving. And we're exiting the summer vacation season. And that means that for the next several months, there's going to be even more excess supply of oil and other energy products on the marketplace. And that is helping pull prices further down. All right. And we see that continuing. There's one wild card that, is impossible to predict because it's the weather. Can't say whether it's going to rain in Kansas. Can't say how cold it's going to be this winter. And one of the things that has helped bring down energy prices in Europe, despite the fact that Russia has cut off the Gazprom natural gas pipe. They're not selling any gas to Europe right now, and yet natural gas prices are falling. Now, why is that? Well, one thing, we're exiting the intensive air conditioning season, and we haven't yet gotten to the winter cold season, and we don't know how cold it's going to be. Also, U.S. natural gas production is hitting all-time highs. Now, recognize, if you're saying, well, wait a minute, my electricity bill is still way higher than it was 2 years ago. Yes, because we're still having to make up for the fact that Russia is not selling natural gas to Europe. Europe needs natural gas. They're buying it from us now. Yay, if you're a Houston oil company or you're a Waco worker on an oil rig, because those guys are making tons of money and things are going great guns because we're getting to replace Russia in the European market. And our production is soaring so that we can do that. That's all fantastic, but that still means that although we're making more natural gas than we ever have, there's more demand for it than there ever was. Gas prices have come down despite that, because I think partly the Fed, but also because we're exiting that big energy intensive period. So we get a breather here, we get a little bit of relief. What happens next? How cold is this winter? Impossible to say. So probably more relief at the pump, because people are not driving anyway and we're out of the vacation period. Production in the US continues to rise. There's a new scheme afoot to cap Russian oil prices and see if we can put more financial pressure on Russia. All these are great things for getting continued relief at the pump. What about at the grocery store? Well, I said earlier, wheat, corn, so forth, despite the drought, they're continuing to come down. However, I think we need to recognize that Russia is now making noise about cutting off Ukrainian grain again. We had a little bit of relief because Ukraine was able to send grain abroad. Russia's making noise about those Americans are cheating, we've been deceived, whatever. And if they cut off the grain again, then we're probably, unfortunately, going to see continued escalation in prices at the grocery store. So a little bit of, on the energy side, seems like we've got, at least for the next several months, unless we have a super cold winter, we've got some relief coming. On the food side, we've gotten a little bit of relief, but the continuation of that relief might depend on, oh Lord, please let it rain, and whether Russia continues to let the Ukrainian harvest get out onto global markets. Much more uncertain outlook about how the food prices. So a little bit of good news on the food and energy front, a little bit of uncertainty, maybe bad news on the food and energy front when it comes to the food part. Net consumers should feel better on the inflation side by the end of the year. And if our monetarist view is correct, then 12 months from now, we're going to see a lot of relief in inflation, both food, energy, a little more uncertain, but definitely the whole core inflationary pressures that we've seen, airline prices, hotels, services, and so forth. A lot of those prices, if we're right about our monetarist view, the collapse in monetary growth usually impacts the economy with a lag. In the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to be really in a period where inflation should be coming down significantly. Stay tuned, you'll see if we're right. That's a great question. And it's actually going to be tricky to see if they can actually pull this off. Because there are places like India and China that are not going to play ball. But when you can enforce either a price increase or a price cap is when you control the dominant supply or demand for a particular commodity. So if you go back to the 1970s, OPEC controlled the marginal supply of oil on global markets. And OPEC was not a single country. No single country, even Saudi Arabia and the US, who were 1 and 2 back then in oil production, neither individually could control the supply of oil to the market. But if you put together 13, 16, 18 of the largest oil producers, and they all locked arms and agreed to act as a team, then you could have enough impact on global supply to take oil prices from $3 a barrel at the beginning of the 70s to $40 a barrel at the end. Yeah, but critically, it depended upon not one country or 2 countries. It depended upon dozens of countries coming together and them not betraying each other. What ultimately broke OPEC in the 80s was they started stabbing each other in the back and cheating on the quotas and basically saying $40 a barrel oil, it's just too good. I'm going to produce more than I told everybody else. All right. So fast forward to right now, the other side, that's called a monopoly provider. They control the supply. All right. The other side of a monopoly is what's called a monopsony. And that means you are the dominant buyer. So you control who gets to purchase the, in this case, let's talk about oil. And what the EU, the largest oil consumers in the world, China, US, the European Union. China's not going to play ball with this. So we've got to take them out of the equation, just like the United States did not play ball with OPEC back in the 70s. But that didn't matter. There was enough power, enough supply power to control the price back in the 70s. All right, now what they're trying to do is put together a monopsony buyer, where there's enough buying power when you put the EU and the United States together that between us, we can refuse to pay more than X for oil. And if we refuse to pay more than X, then China's like, I'm not going to negotiate with these guys, but I might enjoy getting oil at $75 a barrel instead of 90. Just like the United States was not part of OPEC in the 70s, but Houston and Dallas exploded during the 70s because they got to sell oil at $40 a barrel. So they benefited even though they weren't a part of OPEC. And the question is, will India and China and the folks that will not be a part of this monopsony group that tries to put a cap on oil, will they play ball, or will they pay so much more than the cap that it kind of undermines the monopsony power of the EU and the US? This one's going to be tricky because China wants to support Russia. India just wants to buy cheap oil. So it's going to be, I would give it a 50-50 shot that they'll actually be able to impose the cap. But remember, they'd be able to impose the cap because it's not one country, even a big one like the United States. It's the largest two economic blocks in the world coming together and saying, we aren't paying your price anymore. And even then, it's only 50-50 whether they're going to have the power to impose that cap. Thanks for joining us for Market Insights. We hope you found it informative. If you did, I hope you can like the video and share it with your friends. If you'd like to see more of our research or understand more about our pioneering financial planning tools, check out our website, caravelconcepts.com.